The hum of the Invictus was the soundtrack of my life. Every day, the same rhythms, familiar, soothing, almost like the heartbeat of the ship itself. As captain, I had become used to the endless surveillance of deep space, watching for anything that might pose a threat. We were far from the comforts of Earth, deep into the edge of known space, where few ventured and even fewer returned. My crew had their roles, their specialties, and I trusted them all. Lieutenant Aleska was my right hand, a tactical genius whose quiet intensity could outmatch any opponent. Then there was Commander Rookstone, an old war veteran whose experience had been invaluable in keeping us grounded when things got tough. The rest of the crew, each of them a vital part of our little family, were seasoned fighters, skilled engineers, and communications experts. We had been stationed near the Zorath Expanse for weeks, trying to maintain order in a region that was always on the brink of chaos. Pirates, smugglers, rogue factions of alien races. They all made their way through this corner of the galaxy, and it was our job to keep them from pushing into the more populated sectors. The mission had been routine. No surprises, no unexpected jumps, no hostile encounters. It was supposed to be a quiet day. My first officer had just reported in, and the crew was going about their duties. I was in the bridge, pacing slightly, trying to keep my mind from wandering into the depths of space, where worry had the tendency to fester. There were whispers that something larger, something more ominous, was beginning to stir in the galaxy, but I couldn't let that distract me. Fear was a luxury we didn't have. Then the alert came. "Sir," Lieutenant Aleska's voice cut through the monotony of my thoughts, sharp and urgent. "Unidentified vessel approaching at high velocity." I straightened, my heart skipping a beat. We had a tight perimeter, and anything crossing it without identification would immediately trigger a series of alarms. I glanced over at the tactical display, watching as a blip appeared on our radar, far outside the range of normal traffic. The distance was closing too fast for a standard vessel, but it wasn't the speed that unsettled me. It was the lack of data. "Can we ID it?" I asked, stepping closer to the console. "No matches in the registry," she replied, her voice measured but with an edge of unease. "It's too advanced for our systems to recognize. Definitely not one of ours." I frowned. That was new. Earth's fleet was technologically advanced, but if a ship appeared that even we couldn't recognize, then we were dealing with something far beyond our reach. "Raise shields," I ordered, my voice steady despite the rising tension in my chest. "Prepare to launch a reconnaissance probe." Aleska moved swiftly, her fingers dancing across the control panel. The ship's shields shimmered to life, a pale blue glow encompassing the Invictus. We couldn't afford to be caught off guard, especially not with something this strange approaching. My mind raced as I tried to think of every possible scenario. It was probably a wayward ship, a mistake, some outpost sending a distress signal on a frequency we hadn't tuned into. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. The unidentified vessel didn't slow down. If anything, it seemed to pick up speed, closing in on us with a deliberate, almost predatory motion. I looked around the bridge at my crew, each of them focused, but I saw it in their eyes. Doubt. Fear. The kind of fear that whispered that this wasn't a simple encounter. "Keep watching," I muttered to no one in particular. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." Then came the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt it deep in my gut. This wasn't just an unknown ship. This was a warning, and it had arrived far too late. The seconds ticked by with an unnerving slowness, each one heavier than the last. The crew was tense, their focus unwavering, but I could feel the pulse of uncertainty racing through the ship. Lieutenant Aleska stood at her station, fingers poised over the controls, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say it. We all knew the stakes. If this ship was a threat, we needed to be ready. No one else in the fleet had the firepower to back us up, not in this sector, and certainly not with something as advanced as this approaching. I glanced at Commander Rookstone, who stood beside me, arms folded across his chest, his eyes fixed on the screen. His face was a mask of experience, but even he couldn't hide the tension creeping into his posture. "Captain, we need to make a decision. It's getting closer." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 100 battles. We had trained for situations like this: hostile encounters, uncharted ships, enemy fire. But there was something in the air now that felt off. We were facing something far beyond what we had anticipated. "We don't know what they want yet," I said, my voice betraying none of the doubt that was racing through my mind. "Hold position for now. Let's see if we can get a response." The bridge was quiet except for the soft whir of the ship's systems, the faint tapping of Aleska's fingers as she worked. I could see her lips moving, running through calculations in her head, trying to figure out the trajectory, the ship's approach angle, anything that could give us a better sense of its intentions. The Invictus was one of the most advanced war vessels in the fleet, but this unknown ship, whatever it was, seemed to have an edge we didn't yet understand. "I'm opening a comlink," Aleska finally said, her voice steady, though there was an underlying edge to it. It's risky, but we need information." I nodded. "Do it. And keep the shields up, no matter what." The comms system buzzed to life, a low hum filling the room as we waited for a response. The silence was oppressive, thick and heavy, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that whatever was out there knew exactly what it was doing. It wasn't just a ship. It was a message. After a long stretch of static, the comm channel crackled. A voice, distorted, mechanical, came through, so cold and indifferent that it made my skin crawl. "Human vessel," the voice rasped, the words cutting through the air like a blade. "You have trespassed into forbidden space. Leave now or face extinction." The words were chilling in their simplicity, but what struck me the most was the tone. There was no hesitation, no emotion in that voice, just the certainty of someone issuing a final ultimatum. My pulse quickened, and I felt the weight of their threat press down on us, like the vacuum of space itself. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice firm despite the rising panic in my chest. "Identify yourself." There was a pause, a moment of silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then the voice returned, even colder this time. "You will know soon enough. Prepare for battle." The channel went dead. I stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at the blank screen. Every instinct screamed that we were out of our depth. I had no idea who or what was on the other side of that transmission, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a simple threat. This was something far more dangerous, and it had just declared war on humanity. "Raise the alert," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "All hands to battle stations." The crew sprang into action, their training kicking in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were too late. Whatever had spoken to us wasn't just an enemy. It was something much darker, much older, and we had no idea what we were about to face. The bridge was alive with activity. The crew had already fallen into the rhythm of battle preparation, but the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. Every glance exchanged, every quick movement was filled with urgency. We were all doing what we had been trained to do, preparing for the worst, expecting the unimaginable. But there was a difference this time. The enemy we were about to face wasn't something we could fight with just superior technology or tactics. This wasn't a pirate faction or a rogue state. This was something else entirely. I stood in front of the main console, staring at the readings flickering across the screen. The unidentified ship was closing in at a terrifying speed, its trajectory too precise, too deliberate to be random. This wasn't a simple encounter. It was an invasion, a declaration that they were coming for us. Aleska was working furiously at her station, her fingers a blur over the console, her eyes scanning the incoming data. "Sir, I've tried everything." No response from our hail. It's as if they're blocking our communications. I frowned. The complete lack of response wasn't just a refusal to engage. It was a message in itself. This was no negotiation. This was a prelude to something far darker. "Can we track them, figure out their next move?" I asked, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. "They're too fast," she replied. "Even with our advanced sensors, I can't get an accurate reading on their next course of action. It's almost like they're predicting our every move." My pulse quickened. If they were predicting us, then they knew exactly what we would do. And that gave them a massive advantage. I looked to Commander Rookstone, who had been unusually quiet until now, his face tense as he surveyed the situation. He was a veteran, one who had seen everything from small skirmishes to full-scale wars, but even he seemed rattled by what was happening. "This isn't right," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We've never faced anything like this. Not even the Zorath pirates had this kind of precision." "We need to get ahead of them," I said, my mind racing through all the tactics we'd used in the past. "Prepare the drones. I want to deploy a reconnaissance sweep around the ship. We can't just sit here and wait to be ambushed." Aleska nodded and relayed the order. The moment the drones were launched, I turned to the tactical display, watching the small icons representing our ships move into position. The enemy vessel was still coming at us, unwavering in its path, but now we had eyes on it from all sides. Then, the hum of the ship's sensors changed. A subtle shift, but it was enough to make me pause. My eyes darted to the screen and I saw it. A flicker in the data, an anomaly that wasn't there before. Something was blocking our drones. They weren't transmitting. "What just happened?" I demanded. "Sensor interference," Aleska answered. "The drones are still intact, but they're not relaying data back. It's like something scrambling their signals." I swore under my breath. We were running out of options. If we couldn't even trust our own surveillance equipment, we were flying blind. I had to think fast. "Activate the secondary comm systems," I ordered. "I want a direct line to the fleet, now." Aleska's hands were already moving. The connection was established, and soon the voice of Admiral Kincaid crackled through the comms. "Captain Rook, this is Kincaid. What's your status?" "We're in a standoff, sir," I said, keeping my voice even. "We've encountered an unidentified vessel. No comms, no identification. We're unable to track them or communicate effectively." There was a brief pause before Kincaid's voice returned. "Understood. We've been monitoring your position. Be ready for backup. Whatever's out there, we're not letting you face it alone." "Negative," I cut in, a sudden realization dawning on me. "We're too far out. It'll take hours for reinforcements to arrive. We can't afford to wait that long. We need to neutralize the threat now." "Understood, Captain, but you're on your own. Godspeed." The comms went silent and I turned back to the bridge, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. We were alone in this fight, just the crew of the Invictus against something we didn't understand. The unknown ship was closer now, its silhouette growing larger on the screen. My mind raced, trying to devise a plan that could give us a fighting chance. Whatever happened next, we had to be ready. We couldn't afford to let fear dictate our actions. The future of humanity might just depend on this moment. The warning lights on the bridge flared bright red, casting harsh shadows over the crew's faces. The hum of the Invictus was drowned out by the shrill alarm as the ship shuddered violently, throwing me off balance for a moment. I gripped the edge of the console, steadying myself as my heart pounded in my chest. The unknown ship had fired first, and it wasn't a warning shot. It was a calculated strike, aimed directly at our hull. "Shields at 75%, Captain," Aleska shouted over the din, her fingers a blur across the panel. "We're taking heavy damage to the outer hull." "Report on the damage," I ordered, though I already knew it wasn't good. "Engines are intact, but the outer plating is compromised. The blast short-circuited several external systems," she replied, her voice tight but under control. "We're exposed, Captain." "Return fire," I barked, turning to face Rookstone. The commander was already moving, his experience evident as he issued orders to the weapons station, his hands never pausing as he input the targeting data. "Target locked," came the voice of Lieutenant Maros at weapons. "Plasma cannons ready." "Fire," I commanded. The Invictus fired a salvo of plasma bolts, the bright streaks of energy cutting through the darkness of space. The unknown vessel, sleek and swift, barely flinched as the blasts hit its shields, deflecting the energy with effortless grace. It was like throwing pebbles at a titan, and the realization hit me like a slap in the face. We were outclassed. "Adjust trajectory. Hit their port side," I shouted, trying to maintain control, even as the feeling of helplessness gnawed at my insides. The crew was working as fast as they could, but the enemy ship's movements were too precise, its speed too much for us to counter. "We can't catch them, sir," Aleska said quietly, her voice tinged with disbelief as she watched the readings. "It's like they already know every move we're going to make. They're anticipating us." I glanced at the tactical display. The unknown vessel had shifted position again, slipping out of our weapons range with unnerving ease. It wasn't just the ship's speed that gave it an advantage. It was the way it seemed to predict every move we made. They were ahead of us, and we were on the back foot, trying to react. "We need to rethink our approach," Rookstone said, his voice calm but laced with urgency. "We can't fight like this. It's like they know us better than we know ourselves." "We're not going down without a fight," I said, more to myself than anyone else. I knew we were running out of time. We couldn't keep up this defensive stance forever. "Sir, they're closing in," Aleska reported, her voice hardening with each word. "They're targeting our propulsion system." I watched the screen in horror as the enemy ship moved closer, locking onto us with precision. Our shields flared bright against the incoming energy blast, but this time it wasn't enough. The ship rocked again, and this time it wasn't just a warning hit. The power fluctuated violently, and I could feel the Invictus groaning beneath me. "Power fluctuations! We've lost secondary systems!" Aleska cried out, frantically trying to stabilize the ship. The display flickered in and out, showing damage indicators and power failures spreading across the ship. "Redirect all available power to forward shields," I shouted. "Get those engines online." But the unknown ship wasn't done. In an instant, a second, more powerful beam sliced through space, aimed directly at our bridge. It wasn't a blast of plasma, it was something far more refined, more deadly. It tore through the Invictus's outer shields like paper, and I could feel the ship's structure groan as the beam impacted, sending a shockwave through the hull. "Brace for impact," I yelled, but it was too late. The force of the strike threw me off my feet, sending me crashing into the console. I heard shouts from my crew, the sound of equipment malfunctioning, and the deafening hum of the ship's alarms ringing in my ears. The ship trembled violently, and the lights flickered in and out. Through the chaos, I pushed myself back to my feet, my head spinning. Blood dripped from a gash on my forehead, but I couldn't focus on that. I had to keep control. We were still alive, barely, but the damage was catastrophic. "Status report," I demanded, my voice hoarse. "We're offline, Captain," Aleska replied, her voice trembling. "Life support's holding, but we've lost most of our weapon systems. Internal damage is spreading." I clenched my fists, frustration boiling over. Every instinct told me to fight, to keep pushing back, but the cold reality settled in. We were losing. The Invictus was a beautiful piece of human engineering, but against this unknown force, it felt like nothing more than a fragile toy in the hands of a giant. "Prepare for boarding," I said through gritted teeth, the final desperate measure. "If we can't fight them off, we'll have to fight on our terms. We hold the line here." There was no other choice. The air on the bridge was thick with tension, a quiet hum that permeated the shattered silence left in the wake of the attack. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound almost deafening in the sudden stillness. We had been on the verge of collapse, our systems failing one by one, and yet we were still standing, barely. The unknown ship hadn't given us a chance to breathe. Its precision, its ruthless efficiency, made me realize just how outmatched we were, but there was still hope. As long as we still had control over even a sliver of this ship, we could still fight back. Life support is stable, Aleska reported, her voice strained but focused. But we're losing power to secondary systems, the main reactor's holding, for now. I nodded, though I didn't take my eyes off the display. The unknown vessel was still there, looming ominously just outside of weapons range, waiting. It wasn't just toying with us, it was planning its next move, and every instinct screamed that we couldn't wait any longer. "Prepare the boarding teams," I said, my voice cutting through the haze of uncertainty. "If we can't win this from the outside, we'll have to take it to them. We're going to need every hand on deck." Rookstone moved quickly, his old, war-hardened face now set in a grim expression. He had fought in battles of all scales, but this was something else entirely. He didn't hesitate. He turned to the communications officer and started issuing orders to gather the crew. The Invictus was down to the bare bones, but I had no doubt that my team would rise to the challenge. "We'll need to take the lower decks," Rookstone said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "I'll lead one team, you take the other, Captain. The corridors are going to be a maze. They'll have their forces on board by now." I gave him a nod, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. Boarding a ship like this wasn't just a matter of tactical advantage. It was a gamble, an all-or-no-thing bet. But what other choice did we have? The enemy wasn't waiting. They were already planning their next strike, and we had no way of knowing what kind of firepower they would bring. "Understood," I replied. "We move out as soon as the teams are ready, and make sure to lock down the ship's main areas. We can't afford to lose control of the Invictus." The crew moved with military precision, each member falling into their role without question. I watched them work, feeling a surge of pride mixed with the bitter sting of uncertainty. We were facing a force we didn't understand, a force that had the power to wipe us out without even breaking a sweat. But it didn't matter. If humanity was going to survive this, it would be on our terms, not theirs. The ship's internal communications came to life, a soft chime signaling that the teams were assembled and ready to go. Rookstone met my gaze one last time before heading toward the lift. His expression was unreadable, but I knew what he was thinking. We were all thinking the same thing. This was the final play. If we failed, it wouldn't just be the Invictus lost. It would be humanity itself. I moved toward the lift, my legs heavy as I walked past the rows of hatches, each one leading to a different section of the ship. The plan was simple: clear the corridors, secure the docking bay, and fight our way to the heart of the enemy vessel. We had no idea how many enemies we were facing or what kind of technology they had, but we couldn't let that stop us. As the lift doors closed behind me, I glanced at the faces of my team. No one spoke, but there was an unspoken understanding among us all. This was our moment, and we were ready. The lift descended into the bowels of the Invictus, where the echoing hum of failing systems mingled with the growing tension. Every step felt like a drumbeat, signaling the inevitable clash that awaited us. But there was no turning back now. We would meet them in the dark corridors of our ship and face whatever came next. The Invictus would not fall, not on our watch. The corridors of the Invictus were eerily quiet. The soft hum of the ship's remaining systems the only sound that filled the air. The silence felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm, and every shadow seemed to stretch and grow as if something were lurking just out of sight. The moment the lift doors opened, my team and I spilled into the hallway, our boots echoing against the metal floors. The heavy scent of ozone still lingered from the earlier attack, and the faint glow of emergency lights painted the walls in unsettling shades of red and orange. Rookstone was already several paces ahead, moving with purpose, his hand on the grip of his pulse rifle, ready for anything. We moved as one, a well-oiled machine, each of us knowing our role without needing to speak. The layout of the ship was ingrained in our minds, and our goal was simple: reach the docking bay, and secure it before the enemy could fully board. If they had the upper hand on the outside, we would take it back from within. "Stay sharp," I muttered to my team, my own pulse rifle held steady. "We have no idea what we're up against down here. It's better to assume they're everywhere." The silence stretched on, unnerving and oppressive. We passed a few open maintenance hatches, the flickering lights inside casting strange, distorted shadows, but nothing jumped out at us. There were no sounds of movement, no indication that anyone else was present. Nothing except the feeling that we were being watched. As we turned a corner, the first sign of trouble appeared. A low rumble shook the floor, and the walls around us reverberated with a strange rhythmic thumping sound. I raised my hand, signaling for the team to stop. My eyes scanned the hallway ahead, looking for any sign of movement. My gut told me the enemy was nearby, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. Then, the thumping stopped abruptly. The tension in the air thickened, and I could hear the quiet breathing of my team members, their fingers lightly twitching on their weapons. The seconds felt like hours, and the silence that followed was almost worse than the threat of gunfire. Without warning, a door slid open to my left, and a figure stepped into view just as quickly as it disappeared. It was humanoid, but far from human. Its face was hidden beneath a metallic mask, and the figure wore dark, reinforced armor that gleamed in the dim emergency lighting. For a split second, I thought I saw something more, something that resembled a blade of some kind. But before I could react, it was gone, melting back into the shadows as though it had never been there. "Did anyone see that?" I hissed, my grip tightening on my rifle. "Affirmative," came Rookstone's voice, low and steady. "It's not human." I turned to him, meeting his eyes in the dim light. The tension in his face matched my own. "Then they've already boarded." The realization struck like a hammer to the chest. The enemy wasn't just waiting to board. They were already here, infiltrating our ship, and from the way they moved, it was clear they knew this vessel better than we did. We pressed on, moving with renewed urgency. My mind raced, trying to calculate how we could outmaneuver a force that had already gained a foothold on our ship. They had the upper hand in terms of knowledge, speed, and perhaps even numbers. It felt like we were walking into a trap, but there was no turning back. A sudden movement caught my eye down the hallway, a flash of motion. A second figure, this one larger, stepped into the light, its form rippling with unnatural grace. My breath caught in my throat as it turned toward us, its alien eyes glowing with an unsettling cold light. The silence shattered as it let out a guttural hiss, a signal. And then, like a wave crashing over us, more figures emerged from the shadows. Several, all clad in the same dark, ominous armor. "We're surrounded," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. The enemy was closing in. Without thinking, I raised my rifle and fired. The shot rang out, the energy blast illuminating the hallway, but the figure dodged with an agility that should not have been possible. It was a blur, faster than any human could move. Before I could react, it lunged, its metallic arm reaching out to grab me. I barely managed to sidestep, stumbling back as the creature's hand missed my chest by mere inches. The sound of rapid footsteps grew louder, and the hallway was suddenly filled with them. Alien soldiers, each moving with terrifying precision, their faces hidden behind featureless masks. Rookstone fired, hitting one of them square in the chest, but the shot seemed to do little more than stagger the creature. It hissed in pain but didn't falter, its movements only becoming more erratic, more violent. The fight had begun, and it was going to be a bloody one. "Push forward," I shouted. "We need to clear a path to the docking bay. Move!" We fired, advancing in a tight formation, our backs pressed together as we fought off wave after wave of these strange, deadly enemies. The metallic clashing of our weapons against their armor filled the air, but it didn't matter. We couldn't afford to stop. We had to push forward. There was no other choice. We were humanity's last hope, and this fight was far from over. The chaos of battle surged around us as we continued to press forward. Our every step met with resistance. The alien forces were relentless, their movements almost preternatural in their speed and precision. Every shot fired, every strike made felt like a futile effort to halt the inevitable. The Invictus trembled beneath our feet, its systems failing in places, yet still we fought on. It was a test of willpower now, nothing more. It was all we had left. I could hear the rhythmic pounding of boots behind me as Rookstone led his team, cutting down enemies with quick, practiced shots. His calm demeanor never faltered, even as the corridor seemed to close in around us. It felt like we were walking into the very heart of the enemy's territory, but there was no turning back now. The docking bay was ahead, and every inch we gained brought us closer to victory, or our doom. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from ahead. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with the same terrifying speed as the others, but this one was different. Taller, broader, its armor more ornate, reflecting the dim light with an eerie sheen. It moved with purpose, its eyes glowing from beneath the helmet, and in its hand it carried a weapon unlike anything I had ever seen. Sleek, black, and with a hum that vibrated through the air. Before I could issue a command, the creature raised the weapon and a bolt of energy lanced out, striking the wall beside me. The force of the blast sent a shockwave through the corridor, shaking the very foundations of the ship. I ducked instinctively, barely avoiding the next shot. "We need to take it down," I shouted, already aiming my rifle at the massive figure. But it was too quick. It darted to the side, narrowly avoiding our shots, and returned fire, sending energy beams ricocheting off the walls. My heart raced as I realized how outmatched we were. This wasn't just another soldier. This was something more. Something designed to be the perfect weapon. "Cover me," Rookstone barked, his voice tight with urgency. I turned to see him make a break for the left, flanking the enemy. But the alien soldier was too fast. It twisted, its weapon swinging toward him in a blur of motion. Before I could react, Rookstone was hit. The energy bolt struck his shoulder, sending him sprawling to the floor with a loud grunt. "Rookstone!" I screamed, my mind going into overdrive. I fired, aiming for the creature's weak points, its joints, its exposed underarms, but each shot was deflected or avoided with terrifying ease. I couldn't let Rookstone fall. Not like this. Not when we were so close. I ran forward, dodging another blast, using the debris from earlier skirmishes as cover. Sweat dripped down my face, my breath ragged in the narrow corridor. I reached Rookstone's side, pulling him up and shoving him behind a bulkhead for cover. His eyes were glazed with pain, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. "Stay down," I shouted, gripping his arm. "We're not done yet." Rookstone nodded, gritting his teeth. "Get that bastard." I didn't hesitate. I aimed my rifle at the alien leader, focusing every ounce of concentration on bringing it down. The air seemed to hum with energy as I squeezed the trigger, releasing a volley of fire. The creature dodged, but this time it didn't anticipate the way I adjusted my aim. I fired again, this time hitting the creature's shoulder, and it staggered back, momentarily off balance. I didn't wait for it to recover. I dove to the side, rolling across the floor, and fired again, this time hitting its leg. The alien shrieked in pain, its weapon wavering as it struggled to stay upright. With a final, desperate shot, I fired at its chest, and this time, the beam hit true. The alien collapsed, crumpling to the ground, its weapon clattering across the floor. I exhaled sharply, adrenaline still pumping through my veins. The threat had been neutralized, but the battle was far from over. More of the enemy were closing in, their footsteps growing louder as they advanced down the corridor. "We need to move," I said, my voice strained. "Now." Rookstone, despite the pain, pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily on me for support. His arm was bleeding, but he didn't show any sign of slowing down. The others were already regrouping, the remaining members of my team locking down the hallways and setting up defensive positions. We couldn't afford to waste time. The docking bay was close now, Just a few more corridors and we would be there. But I knew that whatever was waiting for us on the other side would be far worse than anything we had faced so far. We weren't just fighting for the Invictus anymore. We were fighting for humanity's survival. With a final glance at the downed alien, I turned and led the charge. We had come this far, and we would see this through to the end. There was no other choice. And as we sprinted toward the final showdown, one thing became clear. Humanity would not bow to anyone. Not today, not ever.